Hello everyone, I am the Desert Gardener. Now in my last video we talked about products, things I thought everyone should have on hand and purchase before planting their very first seed. Now I didn't talk at all about fertilizers. The reason being is it's such a big involved topic. I wanted to do an entire video just on fertilizers. So I'm going to talk about a number of different types. I'm also going to talk about not only what fertilizers you should use, but how you should use them and when you should use them, because I think that's all very important. Now I'm also going to talk about a few different fertilizing methods. A couple of them are very easy, very simple, anyone can do. The third one is going to be very involved, and I'm going to try as hard as I can to mimic what the commercial farmers do, but do it in a way that it would be easy for the home gardener to use. So I've got my Earl Grey tea. Let's get started. So the first method is simply amending your garden soil. Now, just before your last frost date, whenever that is, go out to your garden, get rid of any weeds, turn up the soil just a little bit, just enough to break the crust at the top, and put a nice thick layer of compost, at least an inch over the entire thing. You can work it in a little bit, but try not to work it in too much, because remember, your garden soil is alive. It has microbes, it has worms. You don't want to disrupt their home too much. So just work it in a little bit. I also want to recommend that you should always water your garden even when there's nothing in it. Even if it's wintertime and there's nothing growing in it, water it every once in a while, because those microbes, those worms, they're alive. They need to have the moisture to keep it going. So once you get the compost all spread out, you're going to simply plant, and that's it. Now, a lot of people say that you have to have different fancy store-bought fertilizers. And do those things help? Well, yes, they do. But the point I'm trying to get to is your plants are not going to die from lack of nutrition just because you don't use a fancy fertilizer. Having good quality soil is the absolute best thing you can do. So adding a bunch of compost right at the beginning of the season is one of the best things you can do. Now, if you want to add things periodically through the season, then some manure is a good idea. The best manure there is worm castings. This is fantastic stuff. Just sprinkle it around maybe once a month throughout the season. It'll do great. If you don't have any worm castings, you can do a rabbit, goat, and chicken manure works well also. And last but not least, cow. Now, cow manure is not really that great. There's not a whole lot of nutrients in it. And if you weigh the cost against the nutrient content, things like chicken and rabbit are really much better. But worm castings is going to be by far the best for your plants and for your soil. And that's all you have to do. Your plants will survive. But I know you guys, you want to go one step further. So let's talk about some fertilizers that you can use as well. So this is what I call the full spectrum method. Now, you're still going to use compost and manure in your garden soil, but we're also going to start by adding a fertilizer. So which one do you choose? So you're in your home store, there's a lot to choose from. You can choose pretty much any that you like, but there are a few criteria you need to look for. And that is, the first thing is that it has all 6 of the major nutrients. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. If it has all 6, you're good. So we're going to go to the next one. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the ratio of some of the ingredients. Now, the first thing we want to look for is that first number in the NP and K. We want that to be at least twice as high as the second number in the NP and K. So the nitrogen is going to be twice as high as the phosphorus. Now, the reason for this is when plants are young, it's important they get lots of nitrogen. This helps them grow, create stems and leaves, and grow big and strong. And the phosphorus is really more for creating flowers and fruiting. And we really don't want our plants flowering and fruiting early on. This will actually stunt their growth and you'll get less fruit later on. So having high nitrogen, low phosphorus is a good way to start. Now once you find one that meets that criteria, the last criteria is the ratio of calcium to magnesium. Now magnesium is important, but it's a nutrient the plant doesn't need a lot of. And magnesium can block a plant's ability to absorb calcium. So it's important that the calcium number be much higher than the magnesium number, at least 4 times. If you can, 10 times is even better. But 4 times is the minimum, and that'll work for regular monthly fertilization. So once you get something that meets all 3 of that, you're good. Now again, you can use whatever you like. This year I'm going to be using the Miracle-Gro Performance Organics. It's a 927 2.51. So the NP and K is 927 and the calcium, magnesium, and sulfur is 2.51. Now this is a pretty decent ratio and it's a pretty good place to start here. So let's jump ahead a little bit. So we have our fertilizer. Let's talk about when and how. So the first thing you need to know about the when is you do not need to fertilize seeds or seedlings. All the nutrients they need is going to be in that seed themselves. So when do you start? So you look at your small plants and you're going to see they have a small 2 little baby leaves at the bottom. Now that's not the technical term, but it's the easiest way to remember them. And then the larger, more round leaves at the top are their adult leaves. Now once they get 2, 3, or 4 of those adult leaves, it's time to fertilize. Now I often recommend that people, especially us desert rats, that we start our seeds indoors in early January. The reason for this is because once we hit early March, the plants will have about 3 or 4 of their adult leaves. It's also the time when we want to transplant them out of those little seed trays into a small container. Now many people like to use the solo cups. So you always fertilize when you transplant. This helps avoid transplant shock. And if you plant them in January, transplant them in early March, and fertilize in early March, you're doing those 2 things at the same time, and it's really better for the plant. So this product recommends once a month. So come early April, again for us desert rats, that's when our last frost date is, we are now going to plant into the garden. So we're going to transplant out of the cups into our garden. So again, we're transplanting, so we're going to fertilize. And when we fertilize, or again, it's a 1-month thing, so again, the timing works out perfectly. So you're going to be using this in early March and then in early April. Now in early May, again for us desert folks, it's going to be a little later for you folks in the colder regions, but you're going to see your plant start to produce flowers. Now as soon as you see that, we're going to switch fertilizers. We no longer want a high nitrogen fertilizer, we now want a high phosphorus fertilizer. And we're going to use the same 3 criteria as we talked about earlier. The only difference is instead of the nitrogen number being higher than the phosphorus, we now want it the other way around. Now fortunately there are a lot of products on the market that meet that criteria. One that I've been using for quite a while and one that's very popular is the Job's Organic Heirloom Tomato and Plant Food. Now this works just as well on peppers as it does tomatoes or any really garden vegetable. It really doesn't matter. And this is a 253 NP and K and a 7.5 1.4 for calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Now these are pretty good numbers. This will work great. So when your plants start flowering in early May, you're going to switch to this. Use this in May, June, July, August, and September. Just once a month. And you normally don't have to fertilize in October because it's the end of the year. It's starting to get cooler. Your plants are going to use the last bit of energy they have to spit out as much fruit and seeds as they possibly can. Unless you're planning on overwintering a pepper or something, you don't really have to fertilize in October. So this is pretty simple. You're going to use this one twice. You're going to use this one 5 times. So let's talk about the how. So first off, the very first time you use this, or any fertilizer, on those really small plants, you're going to cut the amount you're using in half, at least the amount that it recommends on the back, because those numbers are really meant for full-grown adult plants. So when they're really small, start out slow. It can be much more damaging to over-fertilize than it is to under-fertilize. So you're going to use this half strength for the first month, and then the second month, when we are now planting out into the garden, we're going to do something called a side dress, which means we're going to sprinkle it on the ground around the plant, on the top of the soil. And then we're going to work it in a little bit with a tool like this, or with your fingers. It really doesn't matter. The reason I mention this is I can't tell you how many YouTubers I've seen that recommend digging a hole, throwing a bunch of fertilizer in the hole, and then planting on top of it. Do not do this. This is bad for a couple of reasons. The first one is, if you've ever transplanted something, you see that the roots are exposed. So you're now taking that plant and putting the roots directly on the fertilizer that you threw in the hole. This can burn the roots and damage the roots and slow the growth of the plant. So why would you want to do that? The other one is simply gravity. So let's imagine we've dug a hole here. This is the bottom of the hole, and we throw a bunch of fertilizer in the hole. So now the fertilizer is at the bottom of the hole here. And then we take our plant and we plant it in on top. Now, and then we water. So that fertilizer will begin to dissolve and then seep down into the soil past and below where the plant can reach. The roots aren't settled yet. They can't get to that fertilizer, so it becomes a complete waste of time. You need to put it on top of the soil, then you work it in a little bit, then you water, and then it'll dissolve, and then it'll soak down to the roots. This is how the plant will absorb these types of nutrients better. Do not put it in the planting hole. Now, this is a pretty simple method. The only caveat here is if you're thinking of planting in containers, and I definitely recommend putting all peppers in containers. I'll talk more about that in another video. But the problem with containers is your garden soil has lots of micronutrients that your potting soil doesn't have. So you're going to need to add that separately if you're planting in containers. And the best way to do that is with azomite. It has 70 micronutrients. Your plants will really love this stuff. The only thing is, this is not water soluble. So when you're first planting in a container and you're mixing in your potting soil and your perlite and that kind of stuff, make sure you put at least 1/3 of your container mix as compost. The microbes in the compost will break down the azomite. The azomite will then give your plants the micronutrients it needs for the rest of the season. So it's a pretty simple process here. We're going to put compost in the garden at the beginning. We're going to use this for the first couple of months. We're going to use this for the next 5 months. And we're going to, of course, mix this into our potting soil at the very beginning. And I think this is a very simple, easy method. Beginner gardeners or anyone who doesn't have a lot of time, money, or effort to put into it, this would be the method I would recommend. But again, I know you guys. You want to go one step further. So let's talk about that. So although this works pretty well, you might expect that, well, first off, there's a couple of issues. If you read the ingredients labels on those products, you'll notice that some of the ingredients in it are water soluble and some of them aren't, which means the plants will be able to absorb some of those nutrients faster than others. So it's better to have something that's all water soluble. And commercial farmers don't use this type of stuff. You'll never see a farmer out in his field sprinkling Miracle-Gro around. It just doesn't happen. What they do is they buy very large quantities of powdered chemical synthetic fertilizers, and they take half of it and they put it in one big vat and they mix it up with water, and the other half they put in another vat and they mix it up with water, and it gets sprayed throughout their fields at a very specific amount in a very specific schedule. Now, humans have been gardening for quite a while, so we've gotten pretty good at it over the years, and we know what works and what doesn't, which is why when you go to the grocery store, you might find one of those big, giant bell peppers, and the ones you grow at home, they're not anywhere near as big. So I set out to analyze what the commercial farmers do and what a home farmer might be able to do or imitate that in a way with products that are easily accessible but are all natural. So you're not having to use any chemical fertilizers or anything. So this is what I've come up with. So first off, the farmers like to stick to a very strict 2:1:3 NPK ratio. So we're going to try and get pretty close to that. And the first thing we do is we're going to need to find a liquid fertilizer to start with. This is going to be our base. And we're going to build on that with multiple products, which is why I call this the cumulative method. So we're still going to put compost in our garden soil. And then we're going to find ourselves a good liquid fertilizer. Now, a lot of people like the Alaskan fish emulsion. I don't much care for it. It's not like there's anything wrong with it. It just smells terrible. And remember, the first time you use it, it's going to be on little seed starts that are going to be in your house under grow lights. So you really don't want your house smelling like dead fish. So I've been using the Kellogg's Organic Fish and Kelp. Now, it does have fish emulsion in it, but it also has kelp, something that plants also really like. And because they're mixed together, it doesn't smell anywhere near as bad. It does smell pretty bad, but not anywhere near as bad. Now, this has a nice, even 2:2:2 NP and K across the board. So it's a nice, even place to start. And because it's a liquid, it's 100% water soluble, and your plants will be able to absorb it right away. This is especially important when you're transplanting. This will help avoid transplant shock. But this isn't enough. We're missing a lot of nutrients, and we don't have the right ratio of nutrients yet. So we're going to add some stuff. So the first thing we need to do is add nitrogen. We need to boost that nitrogen number. Now, we can do that with many different things. We can add blood meal. We can add urea, we can add nitrate of soda, but this year I am going to be adding potassium nitrate. Now, this is a water-soluble powder. It's an all-natural item, and it comes in a lot of different names. So if you see it, sometimes it's potassium nitrate, sometimes it's nitrate of potash, sometimes it's saltpeter, sometimes it's multi-K, or even KNO3. They seem to have a lot of different names for it. It's all the same stuff. So this has an NPK of 13,044. So it's pretty high in nitrogen and really high in potassium. And when we add these together, it's going to boost those two numbers. But we're also missing our calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. So that is where our garden gypsum comes in. Now it's a 22.416 calcium, magnesium, sulfur. So it's a pretty good number. Now remember, when we use these all together, the numbers essentially combine. So when we use these all together, we're going to end up with a 14,246 NP and K and a 22.416 for sulfur, magnesium, or for calcium, magnesium, and sulfur when we use them all together. Now, this is a pretty good ratio, and this is what I'm going to be using for the first 2 months. Again, I'm going to half it for that first month, then full strength on the second month. Then in May, when my plants start to flower, I'm going to boost that phosphorus number a bit. Now, you can do that in a number of different ways. You can use super triple phosphate or super single phosphate, but this year I am going to be using seabird guano. Again, all natural product. It's all water soluble. Now this is a 0-11-0, and it also has a lot of calcium in it. Now for those of you who are really good at math, you probably noticed that I may have just now screwed up my 2:1:3 NPK ratio. But remember that these numbers are based on the recommended amount that you use. So if I were to cut this in half, or even more than in half, I cut that number in half as well. So in May, when my plants start to flower, I'm going to add this, but I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm also going to start cutting the gypsum in half. So when we add all of these products together now, it's going to, what are we going to get? We're going to get a 14,746 NP&K and a 31.28 calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Now these are really good numbers. I think the ratio is perfect. It's a perfect 2:1:3 ratio, a lot of calcium, very little magnesium, and a really decent sulfur. Now this is very close to what the commercial farmers use. So it's very close to what they use without using any chemicals, with using products that are relatively easy to find. This one you'll probably have to order online, but the other stuff you can get at most any home store, and they're usually not terribly expensive either. So I think this is a really good method. Now again, you're going to want to add your azomite if you're using containers, of course. Now, if you use this method, are you going to have the biggest plants and the biggest fruits ever, and you're going to win every state fair? Well, no, probably not. Although this is a really good protocol for nutrients, you have to remember that there are other things that are just important. For example, how much water is your plant getting? How much sunlight? What is the temperature? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? What about the salinity in the soil? How is your soil draining? Bugs, pathogens, disease, these things are all going to be very important and affect how well your plants do, which is why I'm going to do an entire video on every one of those subjects. So if you want to hear any of those videos, go ahead and subscribe and hit the little bell so you can follow along. And if you want to purchase any of these products, I'm going to have links to them all down below, so you can click on them, you can read the reviews, make up your own mind. And if you happen to purchase through the link, I get a small kickback, which would be really nice because I've just started this channel. I only have a few subscribers, so I'll probably never be able to monetize these videos. So getting a little kickback that way would be really nice. So if you've enjoyed this video and you think you got anything out of it, please hit the like button. And maybe share it with your friends, Facebook and Reddit. It would be nice to get this information out. And my next video is we're going to be planting seeds indoors. We're going to be planting tomato and pepper seeds. Now, planting tomato seeds is really easy, but planting pepper seeds is a little harder. There are a few extra steps. I'm going to be doing a pre-soak method. Now, if you've never done that before, you really should check out that video when it comes out in early January. It really improved my germination rate and success with how many seeds germinated. So I really recommend it. So again, I hope you enjoyed it, and please like, and I'll see you in the next one.